February has been a pretty newsworthy month for car sharing. Last week, GetAround announced they would be winding down operations in the United States, and late last week, Turo announced that they would no longer be pursuing an IPO. In this video, I'm going to be talking about what this means, why Turo may have made this decision, and what my predictions could be for the future. So let's get started. Now, Turo announced in January of 2022, so almost exactly 3 years ago, that they would be going for an IPO, but they had actually started this long before, with their first IPO filings being submitted in mid-2021 and official IPO filings being submitted that next January in 2022. And last week, Turo announced that they would be scrapping these plans, with Turo making some official statements with news outlets, but also posting on their official Turo Host Facebook page, and I quote, "The Turo Board of Directors has decided now is not the right time for Turo to pursue a public offering. While the business has delivered strong performance over the past few years, growing revenue from $150 million in 2020 to $958 million in 2024 and achieving positive EBITDA since 2021, we plan to take advantage of remaining private to make important investments that will build long-term value for all stakeholders. Our relentless focus on creating an amazing experience for hosts and guests has allowed us to outperform competitors and become the leader in all markets we operate in. We remain committed to our mission of putting the world's 1.5 cars to better use, and we are incredibly excited about long-term opportunities created by advances in technology and mobility." And when Turo CEO Andre Hadid was asked about this, he just simply said that it wasn't the right time for Turo to pursue an IPO. Now, I think in order to understand why Turo has decided to back away from these IPO plans, we first need to understand the environment in which Turo decided to pursue an IPO in the first place. Now, as I mentioned, Turo started filing their IPO in 2021, and preparations for their IPO no doubt began long before that. In fact, I would argue that the plan to bring Turo public is probably a plan that they've had for nearly a decade, since they started bringing outside investors into the picture. But in 2021 and in 2022, whenever these plans really became to come to fruition, car sharing was extremely hot. People weren't flying because of the pandemic, so people were renting a ton of cars. Not to mention the car shortage made getting cars much harder. This is the period of time where rental cars were so sparse that people were renting U-Hauls for their trips and vacations. It was prime time for Turo hosts back in 2021 and 2022. Pretty much everybody under the Turo umbrella was making a ton of money back then. Really, a lot of businesses in general across a variety of different sectors and industries were making money, so it was honestly a great time for Turo to begin to pull the trigger on this IPO dream. Because 2021 really laid the groundwork for 2022, which was really a pivotal year for Turo as a company. Because Turo had filed for an IPO, they were now required to file what's called an S1 filing, which is basically just ongoing financial statements. And you can see that prior to 2022, Turo was in the red. They've been exploded in 2022, but they have lost a lot of steam since. And 2024 really wasn't a great year for the company. And I'd imagine that 2025 probably doesn't look a whole lot better, and this is probably at least in part why they've decided to drop their IPO dreams this year. Now, the downside of Turo deciding that they're not going to be pursuing an IPO is that Turo now has no legal obligation to let the public know about their financial records. They have had to let us know about their finances over the last few years because of this IPO dream. But now that they've made the decision to remain private, they don't really have to release this information, or at least not in as much detail as they have been over the last few years. Which means that hosts or media outlets won't have nearly as much of a detailed glimpse into the fundamental financial aspects of Turo, and the things that Turo does share are things that they've decided to share, not things that they're legally obligated to. And so they may decide to keep things very transparent, or they may not. It's really up to them. Another factor I believe also probably had a role here is how Turo started 2025. Turo has had a rough year, and we're just in the beginning of the year, with literally the first day of 2025 having a terrorist attack with a Turo vehicle killing people in New Orleans, and then a second one with a Cybertruck in Vegas. I've said it once and I'll say it again, I don't personally believe that Turo is at fault for anything that happened with their vehicles during these attacks and events. I don't think they're to blame, and I don't think that they bear the responsibility of it. However, public perception, right or wrong, is that Turo's name was associated with it, and while I don't think that incident would take an IPO-ready company from being ready to file to backing out, I do think it could be the straw that broke the camel's back to convince Turo that right now is just not the right time. But factors at play here aren't just Turo factors, there's also market factors as well. There's a trend of companies pulling out of their IPOs, and IPO for tech companies specifically was looking thinner and thinner throughout 2024 and continues to look thin in 2025. Sure, Turo pulling out of their IPO absolutely has to do with the fundamentals and financial aspects of Turo specifically, but companies want to IPO in a strong economy and in a strong market, and whenever you begin to see the stock market dip or become more volatile or just have poorer outlook, that's whenever you begin to see companies pull out of their IPOs, and I absolutely think that this is a factor here as well. And so, to summarize why I think Turo has made a decision to pull out of their IPO, I think it's a culmination of a lot of different things, including the fact that the stock market just isn't as strong as it was in the last few years. IPOs aren't happening like they were a few years ago either. 2025 has been rocky for Turo to say the least, with factors that were truly unprecedented to the company and definitely weren't expected. And Turo financially just isn't as strong as I think they maybe were hoping that they would be, given how strong they have been and were during the pandemic. But now the question that I think all of us are wondering, which is, what does this mean for Turo hosts? And to be honest, I don't think anybody knows, but I definitely do have my theories. The upside of an IPO is that we as Turo hosts at least knew the outcome. We knew that Turo was working towards an IPO, and we also knew that many of the decisions that Turo has made over the last 12 to 18 months were really with the IPO in mind. And we knew that once Turo went public, we kind of had an understanding of what that might look like, because we can look at other gig platforms for a glimpse of what that may look like for us. And so the downside of not having the IPO is the fact that we don't really know what's next. Is Turo going to be bought out? Are things just going to remain the same? Could an IPO be in the future? We just don't really know. And while I don't necessarily think that this is a negative, it could certainly be viewed as that. But purely from an operational perspective, I actually think that the fact that Turo is not pursuing an IPO is a good thing for hosts. Since Turo had announced their IPO, there have been stories after stories of hosts with other platforms like Uber, DoorDash, and Airbnb, with stories about how once the company went public, the platform went from serving the host to serving the shareholder, and the quality of the platform went down as a result. And from the stories at least that I have heard from gig workers and hosts on these other platforms, it seems as though this is the trend that overwhelmingly follows an IPO, which definitely isn't a good thing for hosts. And I can see how this would be true, because once a company goes public, the shareholder and the stock price is the most important thing, and by Turo not going public, this is no longer going to be the case, which is a good thing for hosts. But as I mentioned a moment ago when I was talking about the unknown, I don't think that Turo is simply not just going to go public, and everything will just stay the same, or revert back to where they were pre-IPO discussions. There's an old adage in the world of business, which is basically that your business is either growing or it's dying. And for Turo, getting an IPO is a way for the company to grow. And you might be able to come to the conclusion that if they don't work towards an IPO or towards something, then the company might be dying. I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is that I don't think that Turo is going to stay a single private company forever. Businesses like Turo are grown to either sell or IPO. And if they aren't going to IPO, well, I think they're going to sell. When and to who, I have no idea. I think that Uber feels like it could be a natural choice. You may see somebody in the car rental space pop in, or maybe something like Airbnb, something adjacent to the Turo world. I have no idea what an acquisition would look like, and I don't have any outside information that you guys don't have, but I just find it very hard to believe that Turo backed out of their IPO plans without some sort of plan B in mind. But there you guys have it. Turo has backed out of their IPO. Big news all the way around. Whether it is good news or bad news, I don't really know. I think that for the host, it is probably more good news than it is bad, but of course, only time will tell. Like always, you guys, if you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it. So make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.